Hello, everyone. This is my response to Ariana's argument that the UN has been fair in its treatment of Israel in the current standing of the world. While there is no doubt in my mind that some actions of the UN have been beneficial and fair, looking into particular situations of aid from larger member nations of the UN fails to acknowledge the entirety of the conflict. Throughout Ariana's argument, they argue that the United Nations has a large influence of the United States, and the United States has provided aid to Israel, which proves that there is fair treatment of Israel through the United Nations lens. However, this is not looking at the entirety of what's happening in Israel in the current moment. Over the last year, many human rights organizations that are independent from the UN have denounced Israel as an apartheid nation. The organizations cite many deaths in their arguments and have proposed that Israel is attacking indiscriminately. Thus, the nation has developed a reputation in the realm of humanitarian international law. Following the reveal of these situations, the United Nations launched an investigation into Israel, searching for any human rights violations. Those who are appointed to the head of the investigation itself are avidly against the current action of Israel, which undoubtedly makes these individuals biased against Israel itself, and they're unable to provide a fair and unbiased assessment of violations. Ultimately, the argument here is that if you are having an investigation against Israel, those who are running the investigation must be unbiased and able to provide a fair assessment of what is going on in order to categorize the treatment of Israel as fair as a whole. Ariana mentioned specifically the United States' aid to Israel as a token of UN support and fairness. This, however, does not explain current investigations into UN bias against Israel. Congress, in fact, has had 40 members of the U.S. Congress write letters denouncing the UN's stance, touting its actions as morally reprehensible and biased against the state of Israel. Despite the letters, the United States itself, its government, has denounced current investigations into the humanitarian situation in Israel, stating that the investigation is not only unfair, but baseless in nature, according to the Washington Post in 2023. So ultimately, the United States government, the government that is cited as being the reason that the United States is fairly treating Israel, has denounced the current investigation into Israel during this conflict as unfair in nature due to the bias that's present in the investigation. The argument is not whether what Israel is doing is right or wrong, but rather if they have been given a fair stage of investigation. If we argue through the lens of the United States, such as Ariana suggests in their argument, this investigation would not be considered fair by United States standards. Obviously, I understand that the United States is not the end-all be-all of what is meant to be a fair investigation, but obviously an investigation cannot take place if the end result of the investigation has already been decided before the investigation itself has begun. So in order for Israel to be treated fair in this situation and to maintain a fair perspective, the UN must first change its avenue of investigation. There needs to be change in those leading the investigation to ensure that it is fair and unbiased. Thus, in the very nature, the current treatment of Israel is unfair. Ultimately, at its crux, the investigation brings together the UN's perspective on what is happening in Israel, and the treatment of the investigation is directly treatment of Israel, and thus, since the investigation itself is biased, the treatment of Israel is biased and therefore unfair in its nature. Therefore, the United Nations has not been fair in its treatment of Israel.